What's going on guys, Hyper here, and in this video I will be previewing the battle for Azeroth Frost Mage. We'll go over all of the passives, actives, and talents that were changed, added, or removed from the game. Overall, Frost Mages haven't had that many changes, and the only changes were really targeted at removing some of the RNG that Frost Mages had, with maybe very long streaks of bad luck on Frostbolts, and this was mostly done in the tier 4 and tier 6 row, through the alteration of some of the talents. For baseline abilities, the only thing that was removed was Water Jet from our pet, and the only thing that was added was Arcane Intellect, which is the party and raid buff that was added to all 3 specs. For things that were changed, Brain Freeze was changed to have a 25% chance to proc, up from a previous 15. Our Mastery was changed to also cause Flurry to generate icicles, and to also increase the damage of our Frozen Orb. In tier 1, Ray of Frost was removed and was replaced by Ice Nova, which was previously in tier 4. And this talent was also changed to only be castable on enemies rather than allies and enemies. Lonely Winter has been nerfed from 25% down to a 20% increase and no longer affects our Frozen Orb, and this is mostly because that Frozen Orb buff has been moved to our Mastery. Tier 2 and 3 are unchanged, and in tier 4 we see quite a few changes. Ice Nova was moved to tier 1 and was replaced by Ebon Bolt. This works the same as in Legion, but the cast time was reduced by half a second, and it still causes Brain Freeze procs just like it did before. Splitting Ice was moved to a different row and was replaced by a new talent, Chain Reaction, which causes your icicles against frozen targets to increase the damage of your ice lance by 3% for 10 seconds, and this stacks up to 5 times. Essentially, it is the legendary bracers from Legion. Frozen Touch was changed to increase Brain Freeze generation rather than Fingers of Frost generation. So this is why I said that Blizzard mainly focused on trying to reduce the RNG of Frost Mage, with having Brain Freeze have a higher baseline chance to proc, and Frozen Touch being changed to also affect how often we proc Brain Freeze. We really need to have a very bad streak of luck to not get flurry procs for a long period of time. Tier 5 was unchanged, and in Tier 6, Frostbomb, Unstable Magic, and Arctic Gale were removed, so all of the talents in this row are either new or were moved here from different rows. Freezing Rain was the artifact trait from Legion, which makes your Blizzard instant cast and deal increased damage during your Frozen Orb. Splitting Ice was also moved to this row and was changed to also make your Ebon Bolt split its damage. Comet Storm was moved to this row from tier 7, but it is unchanged. In tier 7, we see Ray of Frost appear in this row, and it was changed to be channeled over 5 seconds instead of 10, and also to slow the enemies by 50%. The damage and slow ramp every second by 10%. A new effect was also added, which causes your Ray of Frost to generate 2 charges of Fingers of Frost over its duration. The other 2 talents in this row have been unchanged. So for single target, you really have 2 options, either the Glacial Spike build or the Thermal Void build. For the Glacial Spike build in tier 1, you will take Lonely Winter or Bone Chilling. This will depend on how much overall damage your Glacial Spike is doing, because if it's doing significantly more than all of your other abilities, then Bone Chilling might become better. But for now, I feel like Lonely Winter does still pull ahead. Then in tier 3, you take Incanter's Flow, because as Frost Mages, we want that steady damage. Tier 5, or tier 4 I mean, we take Fingers of Frost because you want to have a Brain Freeze proc for every single Glacial Spike. In tier 5, you can take pretty much whatever you want here, and then in tier 6, I recommend taking Splitting Ice, because this does split your Glacial Spike, so if you're cleaving on 2 targets, this will be a massive amount of damage. Then in the last tier, obviously we take Glacial Spike. So ideally with this build on your opener, you will cast your Frozen Orb, then you will Time Warp and Icy Veins, and then you will start casting your Frostbolts. After you've cast 5, you will be able to cast Glacial Spike. So you cast that, and hopefully you will have a Brain Freeze proc, so then you're able to Flurry to shatter it, and then you can Ice Lance. And this will largely come down to RNG. For some of your Glacial Spikes, you're not going to have instant Flurries, but I still found that it's worth casting them no matter what, just because of the huge amount of damage they do. So every 5th or every 6th cast, I guess, is Glacial Spike. And then if you have that Brain Freeze proc, then you use it on Flurry to shatter it. And if you don't, then you just go back to casting Frostbolts. The second single target build here is our Thermal Void build, where we just try to extend our Icy Veins duration as much as possible. In tier 1, you take Lonely Winter. That is pretty much always going to be better than Bone Chilling if you play Thermal Void. Tier 3, you take Incanter's Flow. And then tier 4, this is where tuning will come into consideration, because either Frozen Touch or Chain Reaction will be better depending on how much damage your Ice Lances are doing and how they're tuned. So if your Ice Lances are a huge part of your damage, then Chain Reaction might be better. If they're just kind of mid-pack or maybe lower on your damage meter, then Frozen Touch will be better. So you're able to get those instant flurries more often. And then Ebon Bolt, again, depending on damage, if it's overtuned, then you might take it. If not, then you probably won't play it, because the benefit from Frozen Touch is just so nice to play, and you'll be getting way more procs, so you're not sitting there casting your Frostbolts and getting like 10 Frostbolts in a row before you get a proc. Then in tier 6, you can either play Splitting Ice or Freezing Rain. For single target, obviously, you'll be playing Splitting Ice. Then tier 7, Thermal Void. So this plays the exact same as it did in Legion, where on opener you toss out your Frozen Orb, then you Time Warp with Icy Veins, and you really want to get as many Flurry procs, which I know you can't really control, but the idea is that you will be getting a bunch of Flurry procs, and since you are proccing Brain Freeze, you can just instant Flurry, then Ice Lance to extend the duration of your Icy Veins. Currently, I'm nowhere near the haste required where you're able to double Ice Lance, but I'm assuming that is still a thing in BFA, correct me if I'm wrong. But after a certain haste point, you are able to actually get 2 Ice Lances in after every single instant Flurry cast. So then you're extending your Icy Veins even more. And at that point is where the Thermal Void build will most likely pull ahead of the Glacial Spike build. So AoE is not really an area where Frostmage ever exceeded, and I noticed that in tier 1, if we want AoE, we're forced into taking Ice Nova, and that kind of forces us again into taking Comet Storm, and that removes a bunch of synergy from our Glacial Spike. And I noticed that throughout the dungeon run, our Glacial Spike was doing essentially the same amount of damage as our Comet Storm, even without having the benefit of Splitting Ice. So if we add that back into it and then we get more damage elsewhere through our Lonely Winter talent, I feel like even on AoE, it is worth taking Lonely Winter with Splitting Ice or Freezing Rain rather than taking the Ice Nova Comet Storm combo. So for this reason, again, tier 1, you take Lonely Winter, tier 3, Incanter's Flow, that's just kind of default. Tier 4, I like taking Frozen Touch, but an argument could be made for Chain Reaction, especially if you're playing Splitting Ice. If you're playing Freezing Rain, then Frozen Touch will most likely be better. And then obviously, if you're taking Splitting Ice, an argument could be made for Ebon Bolt as well, depending on how many targets you're cleaving. Tier 6, like I mentioned before, Splitting Ice or Freezing Rain. This just kind of depends on the type of damage you're doing. For heavy AoE, Freezing Rain will be better. If you're just cleaving 2 to 3 targets, then Splitting Ice will be better. And then in the last tier, I prefer playing Glacial Spike, because on those trash mobs, you won't really be extending your Icy Veins too much, and in dungeons, most likely, you will only Icy Veins bosses, since Frostmage does exceed at the single target damage rather than the AoE. The Frostmage AoE rotation is essentially the same as single target. You just want to make sure that you have your Blizzard down the entire time, and you cast Frozen Orb on cooldown. So what are my overall impressions of the Frostmage? It's not really changed from Legion, and the only thing that they really changed were improvements to our RNG, and that was one huge complaint I had about the Frostmage, that some pools I was getting insane Brain Freeze procs, other pools it was just like pulling teeth and not being able to get a proc and going up to like 15 Frostbolts before getting a single proc, which is absolutely insane. So I really like that they kind of remedied this through increasing our baseline, chance to proc, and adding a talent which helps us proc more often. As far as Mythic Rating goes, this is what I said in my other two Mage videos as well. It will depend on tuning if Frost Mage is played. If the damage is on par with Mage with Fire and Arcane, then Frost Mage could be that niche single target pick where its single target damage will most likely be better than the other two, and then you are going to be playing Fire on maybe Cleave fights, and then Arcane I'm sure will find its place. So utility-wise, we still have the same utility as we did before, where we have Cold Snap, so we have double Ice Block essentially. We still buff our raid with 10% intellect. Our Shimmer was slightly nerfed, but it's still a very, very useful tool. And we also bring Remove Curse now, and we still have the Spell Steal available. So overall, it's a decent utility kit. And in Mythic Rating, I really see Frost Mage and all of the Mage specs really being one of those classes and 3 of those specs that you're going to be bringing, and the determining factor on whichever one is played is just simply the damage. For Mythic Plus, I don't see Frost being played all that much, and that's mainly because of the way Fire is designed. Fire is designed to have that great AoE damage, and you really have a bunch of choices when it comes to AoE talents. Frost is more that niche single target, so for example we saw this in Legion, where in Upper Karazhan and on Tyrannical and on Fortified on higher keys, you saw a bunch of Frost Mage being played over Fire because it was basically an entirely single target dungeon. But then for everything else you pretty much saw Fire because it was more of a mix of AoE and single target. I expect the same thing going forward into BFA. Thank you so much for watching the Frost Mage BFA preview, and if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and sub to the channel. And if you'd like to directly support this channel, then you can check out my Patreon, which is linked in the description box. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.